crazy things have happened in 19 episodes.
No kidding. Who would have thought we would be here?
Yeah.
So I'm Kristen Howerton. I blog at a blog called Rage Against the Minivan.
And I'm Paul Martin. I blog at a blog called Paulosophia.
And one of the reasons that Paul and I do this discussion every week is because we come from very differing sides of the political spectrum. I am a Democratic Socialist.
And I am a moderate Republican.
And, it's interesting because here we are, Bernie Sanders just kind of finally folded the book on the election process for himself. He went ahead and endorsed Hillary. And so you and I are both in kind of the same position in that the person that we wanted to win for our party did not win. And we are both, I think, left in a position of finding the lesser of evils in our vote as opposed to being really excited about who we're going to vote for.
Yeah,
Would you say that's true?
I would say it's true technically,
Yeah.
but to me the gap, my loathing of my party's nominee is nothing like your tepid acceptance of yours. That was a weird way of saying it. I don't like Donald Trump. I don't think he should be our nominee.
You hate Trump more than I hate Hillary.
Thank you.
Is what you're saying.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, which is probably true.
Yeah, and I was just reading today, and this is kind of a beating a dead horse, but you have lots of Republicans not coming to the convention. This is unheard of.
Yeah.
Unheard of. The convention is the place where you network. It's the place every 4 years where you have to be, if you want to be anybody.
Yeah.
And you have senators, you have ex-presidents, you have people saying, I won't even touch Donald Trump.
Yeah, what is happening in the Republican Party is, I think, quite different than what's happening with the Democrats, where I think, for myself and many Democrats, it's like, I really wanted Bernie, but okay. I mean, there are many things I don't like about Hillary, and I did say this on Facebook earlier this week, she will get my vote. I do agree with what Bernie said, that, at this point we kind of need to band together to assure that Trump does not take the office.
Right.
And you as a Republican, I think, are kind of in that.
Yeah, I am, and I'm one of many. There's no original thought with me. I, in many ways, follow some of my heroes on the right, who are baffled.
Who are some of your heroes on the right? I just out of curiosity.
So, in terms of pundits, I'm a big fan of David Brooks from the New York Times. He's reasonable. He's a Republican. I'm a big fan of George Bush, the first George Bush.
The first George Bush.
Yeah, the first George Bush. I didn't think Mitt Romney was bad. I'm certainly a fan of John McCain and Lindsey Graham.
Okay, I have a confession to make, but I don't think I've said this.
Okay, uh-oh.
I voted for the first George Bush.
You
did.
Wow.
I did.
Okay, I have a confession to make.
What?
I'm going to one-up you.
What?
I voted for John Kerry the second time. So we're even.
We are
We are
even.
left and
That's
right.
really
we are
funny.
balancing. You did?
Yeah.
That is a major confession.
Well, because think about it. I think it was the first election I voted in. I think I was in my 20s. And I grew up in a super Republican conservative household where you would just never think of voting for a Democrat.
Yeah,
why don't you just vote for Satan?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So here we are. That makes for a lot of fun in my family of origin. Now that I'm a Democrat. Okay.
You're more than a Democrat.
I'm a socialist. I'm even worse. All right. What do you want to talk about? So Bernie Sanders, he's done.
Yeah.
He has endorsed Hillary,
So
which is super sad for me, I got to say.
And I think we have to say, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, we are in amazing times when a declared socialist could get as far as Bernie Sanders got in the United States of America.
Things
are shifting. And
I agree.
Anybody who is, lamenting how liberal our country is becoming or progressive just needs to understand that we are going in the way of Europe, especially when you look at the millennial voters, how he dominated that demographic. That's the way we're going, and in 40 years, we will be we will be moving towards socialism.
It might not happen in this election. In fact, I think I think there's a chance that Trump unfortunately could win. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the days of limited government and many of those conservative Republican principles they're dwindling, and
Yeah.
the proof is that somebody like Bernie Sanders could get as far as he did.
Yeah.
You would have never heard of that even when in your first
No.
election, if there was somebody who was a
I
socialist.
don't think
they
that would have
been-
happened 8 years ago, the first time that Barack Obama ran, and people were accusing him of being a socialist as if that was an accusation of someone being a fascist. There was, even then, there was still a huge bias about socialism.
I want to. This just came to me. This idea of looking forward, which is very much a progressive idea, versus looking backward. And in so many ways, in this election, you have Trump saying, "Let's make America great again," which is clearly a reference to the good old days when things were better.
Right.
And then you have Hillary and Bernie wanting to make America stronger, being progressive.
Yeah.
And just that alone, I know I have many friends that lament the Leave It to Beaver days,
Yeah.
the days of the Christian moral majority, the days of, of white and safe
Yeah.
and isolated America
Totally.
versus the America that's, I think, naturally
Yeah. Happening.
happening. Yeah,
Yeah.
whether people like it or not.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Well, let's dive into one of the things we wanted to talk about was just this has been a horrendous week for the United States in terms of tragedies. We saw two black men who were killed by police officers in both cases. They were carrying a concealed handgun. In particular, in the case of Philandro, he apparently had informed the police officer that he had the gun, which is what is supposed to happen, and in doing so, was shot. And that really riled people up. And then here you have 5 Dallas police officers who were shot at a rally, which is extremely tragic too. So we're really seeing lives being taken in this sort of environment of racial tension that we're living in, and clearly something needs to shift and be done. How does this play into politics?
It's big, and to me, the greatest tragedy. I mean, in one sense, and we were talking about this a little bit before, but in one sense, there is latent racism that exists.
Yeah.
Many well-meaning people. I think you put a post up this week from the Huffington Post,
Yeah.
where someone confessed that, I guess I was racist.
Right.
I didn't realize it, but
Right.
that there was this part of me that in one way or another looked down on people of color.
Yeah.
And I think people just need to white people need to just come clean for the most part and say that reality does exist.
Right.
It exists in me sometimes. I could be at the beach and suddenly, all of a sudden I'm surrounded by people of color, and I have to confess, sometimes I felt like, wait, isn't this the USA? I confess that. As
Yeah.
someone who's half Mexican and, ethnically,
Yeah.
but I think we have to,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'll tell a story of bias in my own home, and I'm trying my best to raise these, children who are racially aware, and someone came to the door the other day, and my kids answered it, and they came in the living room and said, "Mom, there's a gardener at the door." He wasn't a gardener. He was Mexican. He wasn't a gardener. And so there is bias,
Yeah.
and that there's racism, individual racism, and then there's bias, which is, the world that we're living in, the messages we get from media, all of that kind of stuff, and my kids are living in that bias too,
Yeah.
by making
Yeah.
assumptions about people.
Yeah. And so I think there's that, and then there's also, I was watching something this week on CNN, and there was this very impressive panel of African Americans and people from the police, and at one point, a police officer that was from New York, there was a lady that stood up, she was very impressive, African American, and she said, I feel, every time I'm pulled over,
Yeah.
I feel fear.
Right.
And she kind of documented her family had been in law enforcement, but anyway, this real fear that African Americans feel when they're pulled over by the police, which is just a given. Of course they feel that fear,
Yeah.
especially in urban areas,
Yeah.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And then this police officer from New York said, well, I feel, white police officer from New York, who's very extreme right, in my opinion, right wing, said, well, I feel fear too when police pull me over. And just, here's the deal.
Yeah.
It's not the same. If I get
It's not
pulled
the
over by a
same.
cop, it is not the
It's
same.
not the same.
And why don't we just say that? Why don't people on the right just come out and say, yes, there are issues, there is latent racism, whatever you want, but
Yeah.
it's not the same for black people who get pulled over by
Well,
cops. It is for white people.
Okay, I'm gonna put you in the hot seat, Paul.
Please, Dane.
Because I would like to know the answer to that question. What seems to me, and this is painting a broad brush. I have many Republican friends, Paul included, so who seem to understand that there's this issue with racial bias. But when I look at my Facebook feed, the people who are sort of pushing back against the idea that there's racial bias or police brutality happens to be much worse for black people, the people really pushing back against that, almost always are Republican.
Right.
So why, Republican friend Paul, why is that a party line? What's happening?
I don't think it's a party line. And when I
Okay.
named some of my heroes, I don't think that there's an inherent racism in John McCain or Lindsey Graham or Mitt Romney in the same way. What I believe is that's a shrinking, scared faction of America. And it's very tied into the KKK. It's very tied into these groups. And I think that group, knowing what's going on, finds refuge in the Republican Party. But I want to believe, and I could be wrong, and I might have to switch parties at some point, but I want to believe that there are millions upon millions of Republicans like me who are
Yeah.
repulsed by that. And they don't need to give up their party
Yeah.
because there are these voices.
My friend Charlie left a comment about how these issues are kind of an interesting window into the candidates' own privilege and bias, and I completely agree. And I think when you've got Trump talking about this stuff, if he'll even touch it at all, he clearly is diminishing it, is dismissing it, which I think shows his own bias and privilege. And he's got a lot of different types of privilege. He's got financial privilege, male privilege, white privilege, and just really doesn't seem to have a sense of how any of that affects things.
Yeah. And I think Trump, I honestly believe there's no way to document this at all, but I think that Trump is a mastermind in a shrewd sense
Yeah.
of understanding culture and people and
Yeah.
ratings and all. He's an entertainer.
Yeah.
And I think he was very well aware of that constituency that I talked about.
Right. He's appealing to a base.
I'm looking how he
The base
killed
base.
the base
Yeah.
base, and look how he killed Ted Cruz in the South.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz
Yeah.
does not, trump that same line. He's a Cuban.
Yeah.
And Trump demolished him in the South,
Yeah.
where many of those sentiments reside.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the pieces of news that came out this week is that Trump, not surprisingly, declined the invitation to speak at the NAACP convention. Now, most candidates, in fact, I think there's been only 4 candidates in the past,
30, 40 years, right?
Yeah, 30, 40 years that have declined that. Mitt Romney went and spoke. The Bushes spoke at the NAACP conference. This is supposed to be a bridge-building conference. This is supposed to be, and even the fact that, the NAACP would extend an invitation to someone like Trump, they're really trying to, extend a hand and be inclusive, and he declined the invitation, which I think says a lot, too. Like, he won't recognize that, he should extend a hand to the black community, white people. Laura just said white people. Yeah, white people. Anyway, I was really disappointed in that. Really disappointed. I mean, not surprised, but disappointed.
Yeah. And I think he's in touch with the pulse of many
Yeah.
people who wouldn't be pleased.
Yeah.
And I think he's got them wrapped around his finger. Well,
Yeah.
from David Duke all the way down, this is an issue.
Yep.
But these shootings, and then Dallas, and now we have another potential terrorist attack. We don't know for sure in France.
Yeah.
Is it a coincidence that these things have gone kind of insane since Trump became campaigning and began fomenting xenophobic,
Yeah.
racist, misogynist? Maybe it's a coincidence.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I my concern is that Trump has allowed a very covert racism in the United States to sort of bubble up.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. But, yeah. It's scary. All right, let's talk about VP pick. Potential VP pick for Trump currently is Pence.
Mike Pence, governor of Indiana.
who I don't know anything about.
Yeah, so
Beyond, okay, well, tell us.
Yeah, no, he's the safe pick. He's the one that Trump's campaign advisor, Trump's kids are saying pick Pence because the alternatives, Newt Gingrich and Chris Christie are these attack dogs with kind of a litany of, they bring baggage. Where Pence is an evangelical, he appeals to those people.
Yeah.
He is soft-spoken, believe it or not. He's not an attack dog, and he is kind of your kind of protege, safe, do no harm with your VP pick.
Got it.
Gingrich would bring baggage. Christie would bring
Yeah.
baggage. Pence is not going to bring much.
Well, and
baggage.
it sounds like Pence is very evangelical. I know that he, has kind of fought against reproductive rights. Supposedly doesn't believe in evolution. So this definitely seems like a way for Trump to kind of solidify those evangelical votes.
Yeah.
By proxy.
Yeah.
With this guy.
Yeah,
We
so-
don't know if that's the pick, but that's definitely
Yeah,
what
he will
people are
be. I mean,
saying.
it's almost.
Almost
Yeah,
certain.
all sources are saying he will be the
Yeah.
pick.
Yeah.
So kind of boring, Chris Christie certainly knew Gingrich would have been exciting for the
Yeah.
party. Apparently, Trump's gut said Gingrich or Christie, but Pence is,
Yeah.
and this shows Trump's. I was listening to NPR this afternoon, willingness to do what's politically correct. What his advisors and
He's
handlers.
being handled.
Yeah, he's being
Yeah.
handled,
Yeah,
which is,
for
and,
sure.
and it was interesting after I think the Dallas shooting. Trump didn't tweet, as far as I know. He put out a statement, a written statement.
A written statement.
And from what I remember, there's nothing like what happened after Orlando.
Oh, it's interesting because he did put out a written statement, and I saw the statement. I was at Wild Goose, which is a justice festival, and a group of us were in a cabin, and where were we? We were in a restaurant, and it was actually with Frank Schaefer, who we talked about last week, who's Francis Schaefer's son and now a political activist, kind of trying to break up the marriage between the Republicans and evangelicals that he and his father orchestrated. So I was with Francis Schaefer and a few other friends, and we were sitting and watching the news. And, Trump's statement came up, and we couldn't hear it, so we were just reading it, and we were all kind of like, oh. And I will say something nice about Trump, because I can be diplomatic. I thought it was a decent statement.
Yeah.
Because he acknowledged, the other two men who were shot, and I actually thought it was diplomatic, but I also thought he's being handled. Like, someone is writing things for him.
Yeah. I get a picture in my mind of Ivanka and Eric, like, on their knees saying, Dad, you could become the president of the flipping
Pull us
United
together.
States.
Yes.
Don't tweet. Listen to Paul.
Yeah.
I mean, that has to be happening.
I think so.
And they're tied in the polls now. Trump
Yeah.
has a couple of weeks of conforming to what politicians need to do. And Hillary's email, this thing comes out, and suddenly, and I want to talk about, too, the lack of trust, amongst Americans with Hillary.
Yeah. Here we go.
Back. This is a lesser of two evils.
Election.
For me,
For me
see,
too.
as a Republican, I see Hillary as competent, capable, even-tempered. Yeah, she's a bit shady to me, but she could run the flipping country.
Yeah.
And she's done big stuff, like run the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
She's been the senator. With Trump, who is he? What does he believe? What might he do?
I know.
And
I
so
agree.
this lesser of two evils thing, to me, isn't a big deal, but to most Americans it is.
I have to confess something, too. People are making such a big deal about the email thing. Even when Bernie was in the... Are we dark?
No, we're good.
A lot of other people who were Bernie fans were really trying to kind of tear Hillary down with the email stuff. Like, I don't know why I'm not completely scandalized by it. Like, it's not a deal breaker for me. I mean, how do you feel about the whole email situation?
Yeah, I mean, she lied.
She lied. But Trump lies all the time.
Yeah.
And Trump lives in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, and she got caught. Yeah, it's a great point that a friend of ours just made. We all know that politicians lie.
Right.
By definition. Reagan sold arms for hostages back in the day, and politicians lie. When my Republican friends are incensed over what she did with lying over this email server, which upsets me, and I think was shady, but she kind of knew that if she, if this was the property of the State Department, everything she did would be revealed. But I think it's shady. I still think...
I think it's super shady, and I think it was a total cover-your-ass move.
Yeah.
But I don't think that kind of cover-your-ass lie, which is the same kind of lying that Clinton did with, the Lewinsky thing, I don't think that kind of lie is going to land us in a world war.
Yeah, exactly. No, I feel the same
Where
way.
I feel like Trump's brand of lying, or misinformation or stretching of the truth is the kind of thing that like causes countries to bomb us.
You had to talk
know.
at one point about, help me out, how some people will vote for Hillary because at least we know what
She's a known evil.
a known evil versus
And that's
an
how
unknown
I
evil.
feel.
Yeah.
She's a known evil. I think she'll be very similar to Clinton, her husband.
yeah.
I mean, I think that her presidency will be very similar to his. I don't think she's going to run our country into the ground. I think she will continue to pander to, Wall Street and her constituents, who help her financially, but
Yeah.
so did everyone before her.
Yeah, and the argument many people make, and this is why Trump is where he is we're tired of government,
Yeah,
therefore we need an outsider.
yeah,
Trump's an outsider, this is logic, therefore
Yeah.
Trump should be the guy, where I like it all the way up until the conclusion. So I like those
Right.
premises, but give me Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Give me,
or Bernie Sanders.
or Bernie Sanders,
Yeah.
or Steve Ballmer, or
Right.
another businessman, Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
Give me somebody who's not shady, misogynistic,
Right.
in
Racist,
every
right.
in every way,
Exactly.
upside down. Not to mention shady with his own business
Yeah.
dealings. Like that's the part where I don't.
Well, to me, every criticism you could levy against Hillary is true for Trump. I mean, like she panders to big business. She is, seems to be concerned with wealth, and it's all true for Trump, and then some. So I don't know. To me, all of the things in her column that look like red flags politically are in his, and then even more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with him too, with Trump, and again, this has turned into a Trump session, but there's not even a coherent angle. I mean, we don't.
No.
He's flip flopped
All
on the
over.
Muslim deal. He's flip flopped on. He's flip flopped on everything. So there's not even the Palestinians and the Israelis. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just kind of. He kind of makes it up as he goes along, but there's
Yeah.
something about that nonconformity that tens of millions of voters think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And non-political. I saw some great debates earlier in the week or last week on CNN where, somebody who was for Hillary was saying, well, she gets up and she has a coherent message
Yes.
of what she will do, and she is advocating for a certain kind of way. Where
And,
with Trump,
she's been consistent.
yeah, where with
in what
and,
she's for.
and speaks where with
Yeah.
Trump,
It's all over the
it's
place.
all over the place, and I wonder what's in the minds of tens of millions of you
Yeah.
that think, well, that's what we need in a leader. I don't
Yeah.
want. I want a leader who has. I want a boss.
Mm-hmm.
I want a parent. I want a mayor in my city. I want a police chief
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in my city that has some kind of coherent
Yes.
consistency as to what
Integrity.
he or she does. But somehow, tens of millions of Americans think that flip-flopping and being wishy-washy is somehow a virtue.
Okay, this is a great segue into a question we just got, thoughts on Gary Johnson. So what's interesting about Gary Johnson is he does seem to have the integrity we're talking about. He does seem to have the diplomacy. He's reasonable, he's logical. And what's interesting, though, about Gary Johnson is, for myself as a socialist, he could not be more opposite my personal political views, right? But I would prefer him because he seems like a reasonable person. Does that make sense? So, I mean, at this point, I feel like it's kind of coming down to character and integrity over political platform a little
Interesting.
bit,
That's a
right?
great point.
Because I'm seeing Bernie fans, and again, socialism,
Yeah.
who are then like, maybe the libertarian's not so bad. Okay, libertarianism and socialism,
Opposite.
like completely opposite.
Yeah.
You've got Republican and Democrat in between the bell curve of those two things.
Yeah.
But I think at this point we're just looking for someone who seems honest, and it's like, oh well, you're a libertarian, but you seem normal, so
Such a great point.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great point. And for me, even as a Republican, I believe that Hillary is a better person. Like if we're talking about character, if we're talking about this kind of Greek idea of a good person, forget policies, forget
Right.
like you were saying,
Right.
leanings, ideologies, but a good person.
Right.
I want somebody who I think is again consistent, that has a temperament, and that's going to be Hillary's big point throughout. Is that
Yeah.
Donald Trump is unqualified. He does not have the temperament required. And at the end of the day, even if it's a lesser of two evil arguments, I'm going to have to say that I would rather have Hillary getting that 3 a.m. call than
Yeah.
Trump. What if he's in a bad mood?
Yeah.
He's a commander-in-chief. He has
Yeah.
unilateral ability to do whatever he wants with the military.
Yeah.
That should scare all of you.
And I will say this as a socialist. I mean, Gary Johnson, to me, policy-wise, is really antithetical to everything I believe in, but he wouldn't frighten me as president.
Yeah.
I think he would be a better president than Trump.
So the question is, why are so many tens of millions of Americans they're evidently not afraid? Even David McCullough, this guy that's written all these biographies on all the presidents, he is the kind of elder statesman of American historical biography, and I saw a clip of him the other day. This is David McCullough. He is a lamb who has written the greatest books and done the greatest documentaries saying Donald Trump fails in every category of being a leader, and he's not political.
Yeah.
David McCullough. He's as neutral as they come, but
Yeah.
tens of millions of Americans think that saying carpet bomb the bastards and ban the bastards and kick the shit out of, there is a large segment of America that thinks that's the better way.
Yeah, there is. It's baffling. We're just circling the drain on that.
Yeah.
On that confusion. All right. Anything else from this week?
No.
All right. That covered it. Just all that tragedy and confusion.
Yeah, so.
All right, we will post this up on our blogs. Feel free to leave us comments there. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week.